history, legend, myth. As every story is passed from generation to generation, pieces of the truth fade in each telling. With enough time, the truth is hardly remembered, but still remains for those willing to dig deep enough. When settlers first traveled across the sea to the New World, it was for a chance at a new beginning, to build up lives free from the systems of the Old World and a chance at providing wealth for their families. But that desire for wealth turned into greed, and soon the settlers were taking and killing as much as they desired. When they first found the valley, they saw it as a new land of conquest. The natives told them to respect the land and its water, but the settlers did not care and took what they wanted, how they wanted. One day, a man set out across the lake, taking with him several horses. He had done this many times and was not afraid of the supposed spirit of the lake, but that day was different. Not long after he had set out, his horses began to struggle. They began to sink below the water's surface one by one. Fearing that it would take him in his canoe, he cut the ropes holding the horses and let them be consumed by the lake. He claimed this to be the work of the demon of the lake, and with time, the man's story passed into legend. The valley became unrecognizable. Modern innovation took the place of oral tradition, and the spirit of the lake faded into myth. In the interior of British Columbia, Canada, nestled in the Okanagan Valley, sits Lake Okanagan. This jewel of a lake hosts a variety of gorgeous scenery and epic vistas, and its relatively dry climate make for a perfect vacation spot. Every summer, thousands of boats fill the lake, filled with people ready to swim, boat, and sail on its crisp, cool water. Yet, not many give thought to what might be just below the surface. There are many who believe that Lake Okanagan is home to a lake monster, one known as Ogopogo. Despite its comical name, sightings of this elusive serpentine-like creature date back to the First Nations and continue into present day. This persistent mystery has drawn many to the lake over the years, and in May of 2023, it brought investigators Jason Hewlett and Eli Watson to the lake's shore.
I'm Eli Watson, and I'm a filmmaker and director here at Small Town Monsters. I also produce a podcast called Cryptid Campfire.
My name is Jason Hewlett. I'm the co-founder of the Canadian Paranormal Society, an organization in the interior of British Columbia that investigates paranormal phenomenon, but also branches off into the areas of cryptozoology and UFOlogy. Well, I met Eli back in 2020 when I was promoting a YouTube documentary series that our paranormal group had called We Want to Believe. We were kind of doing a bit of a press tour for that, and I reached out to the Cryptid Campfire podcast, and he was one of the first people to actually interview us about our series.
We kept in touch, and his role ended up becoming a producer of the podcast for a point in time, and now we're just good friends. When I found out I was going to be going to Lake Okanagan, I knew that Jason lived in British Columbia, and so I kind of asked him for some help with the project, and it turns out that he was working on a book at the same time.
And it just worked out that we could both be here and I could assist him on this production.
When we first started the podcast in 2018, never did I think that 5 years later I would be traveling to Lake Okanagan, but the opportunity arose, and I'm not super into lake monsters, but there was something different about Ogopogo that drew me to it, and Maybe it's because that it doesn't look like any of the other lake monsters. It's not a plesiosaur. There just seems to be a large amount of evidence pointing to the existence of something in Lake Okanagan as opposed to other lakes around the world.
Aside from the allure of a potential sighting of Ogopogo, there are many features that make Lake Okanagan unique.
Lake Okanagan is a glacial lake formed during the Pleistocene period, which is the same as Loch Ness. It is a large lake, one of the largest lakes in Western Canada for sure, definitely in British Columbia. It's extremely deep, with depths being more than 700 feet, even further, like 2,500 feet in some areas if you go through sort of the bottom of the lake, the silt at the bottom of the lake.
The lake itself is just about 90 miles long. It averages about 3 to 3.5 miles across. And at its deepest point, it is 780, 790 feet. And that's only to the sediment. After the sediment is 2,500 feet. So makes it one of the deepest lakes in North America.
It's one of these places that was formed in the Pleistocene epoch as a sort of result of the ice which was existent at the time in a lot of these northern regions of the continent, melting into, instead of these glaciers, melting into these large bodies of water, some of which were connected to the ocean and some of which were not, some of which are connected very openly, some of which very narrowly. So it's one of these places that you go to, and the features that you're going to see there geographically have been there for hundreds of thousands of years, which is just such a cool thing. You know, that's a really interesting already facet, I would say, of Lake Okanagan.
There's two main cities on the lake, which is Kelowna and West Kelowna, which are connected with the Kelowna Bridge. But there's other bits of human civilization all around the lake, places like Peachland, places like Penticton.
And of course, it is rumored to house a lake monster.
Of all the lake monsters worldwide, Ogopogo swims apart from the rest simply because it doesn't look like most other aquatic cryptids.
Unlike most lake monsters, Ogopogo is not a plesiosaur. It doesn't have the one big hump and then the kind of plesiosaur-like neck and head that comes out like you see with Loch Ness. Ogopogo is unique because it's much more of a serpent.
If you look at all the sightings basically of lake monsters, and even the Cadborosaurus off the coast of British Columbia, they're all very similar. Long, snake-like creatures, dark skin, maybe sometimes with a white underbelly, this kind of forked whalish tail, and the head of like a horse with like antlers or horns.
In fact, the horns are what's most interesting to me because most of the sightings don't have horns in them, but most of the depictions do, which makes me think, at least in part, that the horns were based off of some observable quality on this creature.
Adding to its distinctiveness, Ogopogo is one of the most, if not the most, well-documented and photographed lake monster in the world. A compilation of all the alleged footage and photographs of the creature could fill several books full of information, but it doesn't take much digging to find the first footage filmed of Ogopogo. In August of 1968, Art Folden and his family were leaving the city of Kelowna, traveling along Highway 97, when an object moving in the water caught their eye. Folden pulled over and grabbed his 8mm camera. Standing on a bluff overlooking the lake, he had a great vantage point for whatever was moving in the water that day. He filmed it until it eventually swam away at a high speed.
He was actually worried his film was going to run out. So every time this creature, this thing, disappeared below the waves of the water, he actually stopped recording. So that's why you kind of have this jump cut nature to the actual film itself.
You know, it's a low quality film, but it is interesting because you do get this mass of black in the water, and it doesn't seem to exactly match typical wave patterns. It doesn't seem like a line of ducks either. The reason it doesn't is because, and Art Folden describes this in several interviews, and you can see this in the footage, this object will be in the water. It's kind of this long line-like shape, and part of it will begin to disappear, the other part will disappear, and then it will come back up again, in a slightly different area. And Art Folden tended to look at that as, okay, this thing is submerging and re-emerging in a sort of almost very slow undulation-like pattern as it moved towards the middle of Lake Okanagan. And this at some point just kind of stopped happening. The last submergence of whatever this object or this phenomenon was occurred, and it didn't come back up.
It had to have been fairly large for him to have seen it out on the lake, especially where he was overlooking the lake. It definitely wasn't something small like an otter, because he probably wouldn't have even seen it.
There has been some analysis done on the Folden film. There is a suggestion that the object, if it is all one object in the film, is roughly 40 to 45 feet long, based on its distance from the shore, and accounting for the known height of the pine trees that are in the foreground of the footage.
Whatever that thing is, it's big and it's pushing water. You can see it making a bow wave. There's no animal in Okanagan Lake that does that. Okay, we've got beavers and otters who I've seen make little wakes, but I've never seen anything make a bow wake that size.
During their investigation, one of Eli and Jason's first objectives was to visit the spot of the Folden film with Into the Portal podcast host, Andrew McKay.
So we're just off of Okanagan Highway here and in the rough vicinity of the location where the Folden film was shot. I think we're slightly below possibly where Art Folden had pulled off the highway, but this is the rough distance away where he caught perhaps Ogopogo on film in the rough area of Rattlesnake Island, which we can see through the trees here off on the corner of Okanagan Mountain Park.
Well, being in this spot, it's kind of interesting, like looking down through the trees, because you can, it really does look Folden film-ish, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is definitely the rough distance. And it's, you know, the thing with this lake being so narrow and with so much boat activity, and because wind channels through these mountains so well, you get a lot of anomalous waves. And I mean, even right now looking through, it's like someone who's not necessarily like researching Ogopogo but has heard the stories, you can look down and you can find some sort of a wave or an undulation that looks like it's coming from nothing in the water. And obviously that just, I love that, because it just leads to more people having interest in the subject, but it just, it almost adds a little layer of camouflage for the actual creature itself. You know what I mean?
Have you ever seen Ogopogo?
I've definitely seen things in the water that I can't explain. I've never seen an actual firm, solid object like something on the Folden film, but I've definitely seen things that at first thought was something like an anomalous wave, but on closer inspection or watching for longer, it seemed like something much stranger. But I haven't yet had my Ogopogo encounter, but I can tell you one thing: whenever I'm out there paddleboarding or doing anything like that on the water, I think about it all the time.
Do you?
And my wife Amber, she's definitely a little bit spooked, and it's probably because when we covered the subject for our show 5 years ago now, we talked about the story of John McDougall getting pulled down in the middle of the lake. And if you're already having to fear a little bit of deep water, that's definitely going to be spooky if you're out there paddleboarding on Okanagan Lake.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, I think the creature's thought of as something benevolent and peaceful for the most part.
Folden's film may have kicked off the modern era of Ogopogo evidence, with every piece of footage and photograph inevitably compared to it in some way. But the legend of Ogopogo stretches back much further than the late 1960s. Early settlers of the Okanagan Valley knew about the supposed lake demon, and sometimes patrolled the shores, musket in hand, in preparation for a sudden Ogopogo attack. In the 1920s, as boats began to populate the lake, captains and crew members seemed to come across the creature fairly often, watching it long enough to see the creature disappear deep underwater as the loud engines of their boats drew near. In the summer of 1926, when a ferry was built to run between Kelowna and West Bank, official press releases stated that the ship would be armed with devices designed to repel attacks from Ogopogo. Obviously, the hysterics around potential Ogopogo attacks faded away as the creature never attacked anyone, but the question of where the reputation of lake demons stems from lingers. To find the answer, one has to dig a bit deeper to one of the first written accounts by Canadian author Susan Allison, whom many claim was the first settler to see Ogopogo.
So it was 1872, and Susan Allison was awaiting for her husband to come back from across the lake. You have to remember, at that point in time, the Kelowna Bridge did not exist, so he was taking a boat across the lake. And apparently, as the story goes, she saw something large moving against the waves. And she had heard the stories of what the First Nations called Inhaha Itku.
Well, Susan Allison is the first European settler to see something in the lake, something physical. And there's some speculation that it might have actually have been her husband that saw it, but for the record, it's believed to be her. And she had a cabin. It's at Quails Gate Winery right now, and actually it's high up off the water, but obviously they built where they could. And at some point, she claimed to have just basically seen a dinosaur in the lake. And this sighting came a couple of decades after John McDougall, who is a Métis settler in the area, and he's technically the first person to report something in the lake who wasn't Indigenous. And the story goes that he was hauling horses across the lake, and they were tied to the back of his boat, and they were going across.
And then something started pulling his horses under, and he had to cut the rope that was keeping the horses connected to the canoe just in time for them to disappear below the waves.
And this is kind of where things get a bit murky, like where settlers believed it was like a lake demon, something to be feared, something ferocious that was like it would eat people. Part of that was also born out of watching the Indigenous people who would give offerings to the lake for safe passage across it. But all they were doing was just sort of giving something in respect to the lake monster or the spirit of the lake, and they'd do tobacco and sometimes just little bits of meat.
So whatever happened to John McDougall's horses, if the story is even true at all, it became attributed to Ogopogo, and the legend started growing that it was this lake demon, that it was this unhappy spirit that lived in the lake that waited to churn up storms and devour people that hadn't paid their proper homages to cross the lake. And that only compounded as more settlers came into the valley and saw something large and unidentified in the lake.
Aside from John McDougall's story, there are no violent encounters with the purported lake demon. Instead, the consensus is that Ogopogo is a friendly creature, or at the very least, non-aggressive. However, it would be remiss to say that settlers were the first to see Ogopogo, as stories and legends of a creature living in the lake are shared among the original inhabitants of the Okanagan Valley.
So, Wachas Chahalt, Isquis Corley, Kintilsta Kakushnut, Kinlimt Putjiap. So, hello, good day. My name is Coralie Miller, and I come from Windy Bay, also known as West Bank, and I'm grateful that you're all here. I work here as the docent at the Centuweeps Heritage Museum, and I've grown up on Indian Reserve number 9. I'm here to help share. It's part of our culture. It's part of everyday life. You hear about it from Kelowna for sure, with all the merchandise around. But then as you get older, you start to realize, oh wait, there's two different entities. A lot of people would be shocked that Ogopogo is not an Okanagan word. In our language, it's referred to as Inhaha Itku. And I'll break the word down. N means inside. Chacha means miraculous, wonderful, divine. Itkuch is the water. So you put all those words together, you have the sacred spirit of the lake. And it's hard when you know something about your spiritual beliefs, but the other community talks about it in a way that's very, very inaccurate. For one thing, it's not some virgin devouring sea demon. It's a water spirit. It likes tobacco, it likes sage, it loves to be sung to, and the only flesh it partakes of is kokanee salmon.
In your tradition, what is Ogopogo?
In Kaka'itko?
Yeah, sorry.
So, first things first, we did not feed it chickens or pigs because we didn't have chickens or pigs. And we definitely did not feed it puppies and horses because that is like the equivalent of rolling a really expensive Corvette into the lake. Those things were expensive. This is where the misunderstanding came from, okay? So when settlers came, they saw something in the water and it spooked them. And then you go further and you see some of our men, they'll put like a tiny piece of meat into the water. And of course they're going to think, oh, holy shit, right? But what happened is we are not putting meat into the water to appease. It's to acknowledge. Everything that we have, all the blessings we have around here is because of clean water. That is what in Kaka'itku in essence is clean water. And water is such a sacred aspect within our culture because when we begin life, we're surrounded by the sacred water in the womb. When we come out, water sustains us. We're made up of water. Water cleanses us. When our hearts are sad or heavy, we're instructed by our elders, take it to the water, because water listens. Water is essential when it comes to creation. Whenever we paint or sculpt or cook or manufacture something, water is the big ingredient. Water connects us. We wouldn't be talking with each other if we didn't have the waterways to carry us up and down. But also water teaches us to be mindful because whatever you do upstream is going to affect somebody downstream. So that's water. Does it have a physical form? Absolutely. Do we believe there's something in the lake? Yeah. But just like our forest spirit, Stronitum or Sasquatch, it's a shapeshifter, it's a dimension walker. So it will manifest itself, and in our elder stories, it is actually very dark in color. It's got a head that's similar to a horse, and it'll have antlers much like a deer. And it doesn't move like this. I had one elder tell me, if someone tells you it was moving like this, they're lying to you. It moves like this. We're like, okay, like serpentine. But that's its spiritual form. Its true and tangible form is the water itself. And so people ask us, well, how would you catch it? It's like, here's a cup. Go to town. So yeah, John McDougall, 1850s. He had his horses sucked down, and his boat almost went out under as well. But again, I think that goes to not understanding the lake and what's underneath it, because this was a lot of uncharted terrain for settlers. We knew what to watch out for in the lake, but he probably didn't. And so those horses probably got sucked under by underwater current. But he was also a player, so maybe it was karma trying to get him. He made a lot of babies with us, but yeah. Then there's Miss Susan Allison in the 1870s, a little bit later. She saw it too, and she was spooked, and she tried asking us about it. And in the best way we could, we tried to tell her, like, don't worry, it's fine. Its name is Nkaka'itko. And she goes, Naitaka? We're like, okay, sure.
So that's where that name comes from.
That's right, yeah. The same thing with Okanagan, like, that is another story. Like, we got called Okanagans, again, just from misunderstanding. Our actual name is the Siil people. The word Okanagan came from the word Sukunakainoch, which got butchered to Ukanakain to Okanagan, and that's how we got saddled with that. So that's a story for another time.
The West Bank First Nations do not recognize Ogopogo as being the same as their water spirit, but history and the people of Kelowna have undoubtedly conflated the two. But just where does the name come from?
Ogopogo is a made-up word. It was actually a song that circulated in the Vernon dance halls, and it was called Ogopogo, the Funny Foxtrot. was played in the dance halls and people just really liked it. And the song is basically about like a sea creature that knows how to play the banjo. It just caught on. People just started calling whatever lived in the lake, this monster, Ogopogo.
One fine day in Hindustan, I met a funny little man with googly eyes and lantern jaws, an old silk hat and hairy paws. When I said to that quaint old chap, why do you carry that big seaman perhaps a butterfly net and rusty gum? He replied, listen here, my son, I'm looking for the Ogopogo, the funniest Ogopogo. His mother was a pollywog, his father was a whale. I'm going to put a little bit of salt on his tail. I want to find the Ogopogo while he's playing on his old banjo. I just want to take him back home where I'll take him, and then I will make him the sensation in a Broadway show.
And so it really has nothing to do with what people are seeing. It's like the catchy, fun, touristy name that's been sort of just associated with what is really an important bit of Indigenous Aboriginal lore.
So there was already something living in the lake, and they thought, Ogopogo, that's a funny word, so they just kind of mashed them together. And before that, it became a cultural icon for the city of Kelowna. It became a mascot. It was green, it's derpy looking, it sells apples and jerky, and that's great. That's fine. We don't want that to go away, but we need to make something clear. Ogopogo and Nchachaiku, those are not the two same things. That thing represents consumerism, tourism. Ours is a whole different aspect.
And was it true, I think the city of Vernon owned the copyright or
Yeah.
something to the Ogopogo name, and they just recently...
They gave it to us, and we're
Yeah.
like, thank you. Thank you.
The Okanagan Valley has embraced their resident cryptid, but none as much as the city of Kelowna.
Kelowna has very much embraced the idea of Ogopogo. There's Ogopogo on everything. There's Ogopogo boats and Ogopogo burgers and Ogopogo plushies and Ogopogo this and that and the other.
The Okanagan communities are really interesting. You have all kinds of people there with different attitudes in regard to Ogopogo. There are many of them who do not think it exists, and in that group of people there are the outright cynics. Nah, there's nothing in that lake. The only time you see Ogopogo is when you go to the winery, you know. And then there are other people I know of who are ambivalent towards it, which is like, yeah, people see something in that lake, it must be something there. And then you've got the witnesses who didn't go out there looking for this thing, but it showed up, and they saw it, and they had to tell somebody. They usually told Arlene Gall or Mary Moon or Bill Stesiak and myself and Braden Halverson today about their experiences out there on the lake and what had occurred to them. The actuality is a lot of people saw something out on that lake that's got 4 or 5 humps. It could be anywhere between 10 and 60 or 70 feet long. So you've got people consistently talking about this animal. And so in the Okanagan, the opinions about this are as diverse as they are anywhere else in the world. There's no sort of general Okanagan doctrine that, yay, Ogopogo, we're all behind this. You got people say, are you mad? Are you crazy? You think this thing exists? Come on, give me a break.
Perhaps the most well-known public celebration of Ogopogo is the statue in Carey Park. Built in 1960, it marks the acknowledgement of the historical presence of a creature in the lake. 8 years later, Art Folden would capture something resembling the creature on his 8mm camera. But that wasn't the only event of significance in 1968. That year introduced a woman who would do more research into the aquatic creature than anyone had before.
You know, one of the greatest researchers that we've ever had here for Ogopogo in the Okanagan is Arlene Gall. Great lady, has more information over the years on Ogopogo than absolutely anybody. And she's very well known worldwide. Just a great woman.
She moved to the Okanagan in the 1960s and became acquainted with the Ogopogo legend and became very interested in it, to the point where she started cataloging sightings until she had her own. And then she added even more sightings after that, and she wrote 3 books on the subject. She is a really enthusiastic investigator, researcher, if there ever was one. And we called her the Lady of the Lake. She was like the first lady of Ogopogo.
She did a tremendous amount of the groundwork by collecting eyewitness reports, collecting photographs, collecting footage, and preserving that stuff that would probably otherwise be lost.
She was a journalist, a writer for the local paper who just happened to hear these stories of Ogopogo. It's interesting how her kind of stories are a little bit similar to John Green and Sasquatch. They're both journalists. They both start hearing these stories and want to learn more about them. And she just started to become a collector of Ogopogo stories, of Ogopogo literature, lore. She has the rights to the Folden film. Of course, she passed away since the pandemic, and her family has all of her research material and all the films on it.
For many people, Arlene Gall was the go-to person for anyone who had a sighting of something anomalous on the lake. One of the many people who spoke to Arlene about their sighting was Kelowna resident Jackie.
It was the summer of 1977, so probably July or August. We were sitting on the beach down at Manhattan Point, and there was my sister and myself and her neighbor. And it was like 7:30 in the morning. The lake was like glass. It was just beautiful. And then we saw these ripples coming up, and it was like a little wave. And we were like, what is that? Because it was so clear, and we thought, oh, it must be just undercurrents. Then all of a sudden, this big black, I thought at first it was a scuba diver that had come up, but it was kind of black rubbery looking or dark green, and then it kind of just went down and then started swimming down the lake, and you could see it kind of going up and down. So we phoned the radio station and said we just think we just saw Ogopogo, and they said that somebody else had spotted it about 2 miles before us, and that was pretty much all we saw. I grew up in Kelowna, so all our life we heard about Ogopogo, and you know, sometimes when you're water skiing and stuff, you didn't want to fall because you're scared you're gonna, you know, meet up with the Ogopogo while the boat's coming back around for you. But you know, it was just something that we had always heard, but that was my first and only encounter with it. But it was pretty exciting.
Yeah.
But not everyone is as willing to come forward about their sighting like Jackie. For many people, coming forward with their sighting is to admit that they've seen the impossible, and even fewer are willing to take on the potential cost of lost friendships or job security. Although with the rise in popularity of interest in cryptids through internet communities, some speculate that the stigmas are beginning to change.
Back in '99, we did a survey of people, inhabitants of, not tourists, but people who live here in Kelowna, in the lake. And we had a very simple question. The question was, if you saw something in the lake that you couldn't explain, would you call the media and give them your name and your sighting? The results of that survey was absolutely astonishing. Of 1,000 people we surveyed, 8% would have called in their sighting. 92% wouldn't do it. The interesting thing is, with the majority of sightings that we have had on this lake over the last 25 years, if that only represents 8%, I mean, 92% didn't, you do the math on that, it's unbelievable. Again, we did a survey just recently. It was a shorter survey, it was only 200 people, but once again, it was done by people here that live on the lake, and the majority of them did live on the lake. The average age was about 50, and we asked them the same question. If you saw something in the lake, would you report it? And 25% of them would. So something's happened over the 20 years in terms of people's thinking about, hey, unidentified objects, fish. I mean, let's face it, I mean, scientists are finding 10,000 new species a year worldwide. Majority of them are in the oceans, sure, but there's a lot found in fresh water too. And I think that is making a difference in terms of what people are thinking. Hey, why can't there be something here that's unexplained? Something hasn't been discovered. So that was an interesting survey, the last one. And also, 20% of the 75% that said they wouldn't said that they knew somebody or they had seen something actually themselves but didn't report it. So it was quite an interesting survey.
Some of the few people who have come forth with their sighting in recent times were 3 Kelowna residents, Dale, Colleen, and Myrna.
So one of the most recent events in terms of the Ogopogo history is a photograph that was taken in October of 2022. This image surfaced on the internet and just it made the rounds, and so I found out about it, and almost instantly there was like 1,000 different theories about what it could be. That it could be a duck, that it could be a crawfish, that it was a wolf, and I didn't really know what to make of it. I wasn't really looking at it closely, I just was aware of it. But as this project started to take shape, Jason mentioned that he was in contact with the people who took the photograph. I realized that this was an opportunity to really dig deep into a specific case.
Eli and Jason's next stop during their investigation was to meet with Dale, Colleen, and Myrna to discuss the photograph and visit the rough location of where it was taken.
What were you guys doing out here on the day?
Just what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Enjoying the lake.
So it was October 15th, 2022, when we came out, but my mom had passed away the day before, and she was 96, so we were very happy that she lived that long, but I wasn't too much into coming out here. I was kind of depressed, as a person would be, and I said, universe, give me something else to think about besides my mother's death. And so we came out, and the day was the sun. Remember, Myrna, the sun was glistening on the water. It was just, and for October, it was the last sail of the year because it was warm and beautiful out here. And so then I was like very thankful that I was out here, and then all of a sudden we saw the thing in the water.
Well, we first saw two prawns kind of coming up out of the water that looked like seaweed. But it's fresh water. And where would the seaweed come from? And it was in the middle of the lake.
Yeah.
And there was something underneath it we couldn't really see because of the glare of the water. And we knew there was something there, but we didn't know what. So
it looked like a deadhead at first,
or
which
a
is
log.
a log standing straight up and down in the water, but it wasn't straight like a log would normally be. And I didn't like the looks of it. I thought, well, that's a bit of a boating hazard. So we got past it a ways, and I said to the girls, oh, let's turn around and go back. And I said, Colleen, get your camera ready, because something didn't look right about that thing. Mm-hmm. It didn't bounce up and down in the water at all. It just stayed stable.
Yeah,
stable.
Super still.
So we got within about 12 feet of it, and she took that picture. And we were just kept right on going, because the speed we're going right now, this is our getaway speed.
Yeah.
Because it was a very similar wind, same direction the day that we got the picture.
So I got up, I stood up there and kind of leaned over the bow and took one picture, which I kind of regret having only taken one, but it was the way it was. I took one picture, but while we were very slowly moving past it, I could clearly see the rest of it under the water. Like, it was one thing to see what was sticking up out of the water, but I saw what would appear to be its body or a neck, or the rest of it under the water, under the darkness of the water. And then, so I took the picture, and then we just kind of kept on going, right?
Yeah, well, I think we were all a little bit shocked at what we saw.
Yeah.
Basically, because we couldn't figure out what the heck it was.
I think what shocked me the most was how big they described it.
How big was it?
The head was,
all of that.
in that picture, the what would be horns or nodules,
About that far
they're at least that far apart.
And they were sticking out of the water about, say, 3 or 4 inches. You could clearly see it looked like horns, or horns and ears. To me, it looked like horns and ears. And I found that it looked almost like, when I looked at it, I thought it was like, it's not wood because it looks more like skin.
Yeah, it was, yeah. If it was wood or something, it had been deteriorating for a long time.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like a stump. You look real close, it's not a stump.
If they're telling the truth, and there's no reason to assume that they're not, then what they saw was huge.
And I was a bit skeptical, a little bit, because you got to have a little degree of skepticism. But when you go out to where they saw it, it's the middle of the lake. It's hundreds of feet deep. We saw like driftwood and stuff floating in the water, and it bobs up and down. And to hear them explain that it was just sitting under the water, looking at them, not moving, like, I'm convinced they got the most recent picture of Ogopogo or Nahatik, the spirit of the lake in its physical form.
And then when we got back to the shore and we got thinking about what it was that we saw, I was like, wow, I said a prayer about that. Like, give me something to distract me from being not in the mood to be on the boat. And all of a sudden I look at this picture and I'm like, that is how big God is. He produced it, she, whatever, produced the Ogopogo. It was amazing. The other thing is, though, because it was October, it was so late, there were no other boats out here. We were literally the only boat, I bet you could say, almost on the whole lake.
Maybe one or two.
Because it was so quiet, and maybe that's why we saw it. Maybe it was, it's more prone to be seen when there aren't speedboats going around and so many people on the lake that it gets scared and goes down low. Possibility. Yeah.
If there is such a thing as this Ogopogo, my bet is it eats fish. And if you realize October, guess what's happening in October? It's the last of the salmon run coming through here.
So I lived here back in the 70s. I graduated from school in Kelowna. And I remember a lot of my friends as we were at the beach, saying they had seen it or they had heard about it. But then I think it was in the 70s that concrete statue of the Ogopogo got put into the park downtown. And the first thing I thought of is what we saw looks very similar to that. So where did that image come from? Who created that? Somebody else that saw what it looked like? But as kids, we all talked about it. We were all, aware that there was some kind of a sea monster, or at least there was rumors of it. But it's just a known Okanagan thing. It's, you come here and that's what brings tourists here, is to hear about it or maybe see it. You never know.
Since it first emerged on the internet in October of 2022, the photo has been subject to an incredible amount of skepticism, with seemingly everyone having an opinion on what was in it.
Yeah, it's a picture of an upside-down dead crayfish. Look at it. Those are the claws sticking out of the water. Okanagan Lake has a phenomenon that's really bizarre, okay? They have crayfish in that lake that are this long. If you look at that in the picture, okay, this is not 3 feet in between the claws. Look at it carefully, enlarge it, and you'll actually see the gap between where the pincers fit. It's clear as day. It's lying upside down because it's dead. It floated to the surface, okay, and it's like this. And that's what those things are. People say, oh, it has a face like a dog and blah, blah, blah. I compared that to pictures of the known crayfish in Okanagan Lake. There's no question that that's a crayfish. It's not Ogopogo. It doesn't look anything like an Ogopogo. Some people thought it was a Halloween prop, which is around the time when they shot that. But I don't think these people were being malicious or anything. It was just misidentified.
The photograph taken in October of 2022 is, I think, one of the best and most strong pieces of evidence for an unknown aquatic species in Lake Okanagan. Now, the look of it is one thing that strikes me a great deal, because it is super typical Ogopogo profile, almost archetypal Ogopogo, I'd even say. There's a theory that it's a duck diving beneath the surface, so what you're seeing is kind of the front of the duck's face under the water, the body coming back, and then its legs poking up like that, making the horn shape. I've looked up and down at footage of ducks diving, and that is just not a posture that they assume. It's just not. So that's a problem with the duck theory. The other problem with the duck theory is that there's no splash indication in the water. This would be the absolute smoothest duck dive I've ever seen caught on camera. There's no indication of ripples. This looks like a still object, a very still object. But there is really, I think, a smoking gun, which is that there is an extension below the object. So you have this sort of the bottom of the object, let's say, but there's an almost cylindrical continuation below the waves, not a reflection of the two protrusions. It is below the waves. So, the object is not just this lump with these two protrusions, it actually continues downward. And just to make an observation, it looks like a continuation of a serpentine body with a head close to the surface with these two horn-like protrusions.
What I find interesting about the horns is every depiction of Ogopogo seems to have the horns. The First Nations depiction of Inhaha'itku contains horns. The statue there in downtown Kelowna contains horns. And virtually any merchandise you're going to purchase contains horns. So where did this idea of horns come from? Well, it's possible what we're looking at is a case of sexual dimorphism, which is the males and the females have different physical traits. So in this case, maybe a male Ogopogo has horns while the females don't. That could lead further into speculation because the ones that are most likely to go exploring and splash around and get curious and check out humans are probably the young. Usually in the animal kingdom, the young are accompanied by the female, which in this case wouldn't have horns. So if the females and the offspring are seen most often, then most of the sightings aren't going to have horns. Whereas the males would probably play it more safe, they would probably remain lower, they would probably come up towards the surface of the lake when there's not many people out on the lake, and they're the ones with horns, which means that they've probably been seen before, but they're not as visible now because of how many motorboats are on the lake. I'm assuming if Ogopogo's an animal that they behave like most other animals do to motorboats, which is they tend to display a little bit of fear. They like to keep their distance away from the motors. So if that's the case, they're not going to be up on the surface very often. They're going to be down low. And in the rare instance when Dale, Colleen, and Myrna were out with a sailboat with no motors, then they might be able to slip by undetected, witnessing things that have come up towards the surface of the lake.
No matter what exactly is in the photograph, there are still many people who have claimed to see something in the lake and filmed it.
On July 25th, 1992, Paul DeMauro was having dinner at his mother's lakeside residence there on the lake. And at about 7:15 p.m., him and everyone else there saw a disturbance in the water. They didn't know what it was. It wasn't like anything they had ever seen before. So after about a minute of watching it, Paul grabbed his camera and started to film it.
5 to 7 things, let's say, are swimming across the lake. And as they get close to the shore, a motorboat with a water skier drives around, and the water skier sees these things and jumps into the water. Like, are you mad? I would hang on for dear life and get myself out of there. And you can hear on the videotape, uh-oh, he's fallen in the water, it's gonna eat him. You know, you can hear this from the people who are watching it. But they swam right past him, very close. We've never been able to find out who he was in any way, shape, or form. Don't worry, we've tried, but nobody will come forward with those kinds of sightings. That isn't just known phenomena. It's not a school of fish. It's not a group of beavers or otters or anything else. Those heads are big. They're at least the size of a human head, And there's no animal the size of a human head in Okanagan Lake other than humans, and possibly Ogopogo. The shape is definitely sort of serpentine, you know, reptile-ish, but Damara's footage is absolute gold.
A few years before Paul Damara captured multiple creatures in the lake, researcher John Kirk had his own brush with something he could not explain.
My whole reason for being involved in this field was an act of fate that I will never forget. In May of 1987, I had just moved to Canada from Hong Kong, and my ex-wife wanted to find a friend who lived in Kelowna and owned a winery. And while we were up there, my son and a lady friend of ours who we'd met in Kelowna were looking out over the lake and arguing. And I'm going to myself, my son doesn't argue very often. I'm going to find out what's making him so annoyed and, you know, be nice to people. Anyway, he says to me, she keeps saying that that's a boat. And I'm telling you, that's not a boat, that's a head. And I said, what are you talking about? So look in the lake. And I looked in the lake and he was right, it was a head. And it was a big head. For us to be able to see it from where we were standing, it must have been 2 to 3 feet long, easily. And it's just lying flat on the surface and swimming at a decent clip, it was pretty fast, without making any wake. No bow wake, no trailing wakes, nothing. And then all of a sudden it just turns and heads towards the other side of the lake, you know, from a southward direction to an eastward direction. And it swam into the heat haze where I lost it. I couldn't see it anymore in the heat haze. And I said, geez Louise, that must be the thing that people call Ogopogo. About 15 to 20 minutes later, we hear the dogs barking down the hill in the compound of a guy who's like the ex-governor of BC. We call them premiers here. And his dogs are going berserk and looking at something in the lake. So I avert my gaze from looking at the dogs to the lake, and there's this thing lying on the lake, easily 60 feet long. And it's got a very longish neck with a small head at the end of it, and a series of 5 or 6 humps behind it, and what looked like a tail structure trailing underneath the water. And I'm looking at this thing and I can't believe my eyes, there's something that big in the lake. Anyway, I'm filming this with my high 8 camera for a bit, and all of a sudden it just sunk vertically, and on the surface was a slick that looked like body oils or something in the shape of what had been lying there. So it was astonishing. And I'm thinking to myself, God, we've seen this thing twice in a day. So it's real, what is it? As a consequence of that, a search notion began to be fueled in my mind. And I thought, why isn't anybody identifying this scientifically? It behooves us that whenever there is some undiscovered species out there, we need to catalog this. But because it was associated with native lore and all that kind of jazz, the colonialist mindset of the time was, it's a native superstition, which is rubbish. You know, native people don't make up stuff. They don't have supernatural creatures that are different from animals that we know. They're like supernatural crows, supernatural ravens, supernatural wolf, bear, beaver, whatever. They're all based on animals that are known in the complex organic world. And the natives, at least, were 10 miles ahead of the neo-colonialists. We needed to find out what this animal was, and I made it a conscious decision that I'm not going to rest until I find out what it really is, in terms of where it fits into the entire spectrum. My sighting was on the 19th of May of 1987. For me, every year it's an important date because it signifies that I came out of my comfort zone. I'd worked as a journalist prior to that, so everything I had to do was based on fact, evidence, and accurate reporting. Now, here I had this phenomenon in British Columbia inland waters that had to be dealt with. So I had to find like-minded people with whom I could work because I couldn't finance a gargantuan scientific search on my own. I had to find ways and means of doing this and stretching the buck to do it. So I found Jim Clark and Paul LeBlanc. Jim was a freelance writer and Paul was head of the oceanography department at UBC. They had this notion of starting a cryptozoology club, and I met up with them and said, okay, I'm part of this, so let's go and get this club going. So the 3 of us founded the club, which has now been going for, this year will be our 34th year of activation, and it's been a hell of a journey because You go through a lot of mockery, you go through a lot of abuse and cynicism by people who really don't know what they're talking about. We've discovered that there are many animal species we don't know anything about. I'm not saying this is some kind of super creature, weird creature, supernatural, occultic or whatever. This is an animal. What kind of animal is this thing? It has features of a bunch of different animals all in one. It's like a chimera. Sorry, mate, we don't have too many of those. We need to figure out what the heck this thing is. And that has been a sort of a life pursuit for me.
Lake Okanagan has an island near Squally Point and across the way from Peachland. This small, uninhabited island is now called Rattlesnake Island, but it is often thought to be the home of Ogopogo. The only way to get to the island is by boat, so to get there, Eli and Jason contacted Ogopogo researcher Bill Stajic.
Well, my name is Bill Stasiak, and I've spent the last 25 years looking for our friend here in Okanagan Lake, Kelowna, BC, Canada. When I first moved to Kelowna, which was a number of years ago, I was not necessarily a believer in Ogopogo. In the late 80s, I saw Ogopogo off Okanagan Lake Bridge, and I became a believer. Subsequently, years later, I organized expeditions and we went out on the lake, and we've had some reasonable success. After our first expedition, we decided to get a website together. We were getting a lot of interest from a lot of people all over Western Canada, and we thought a nice public website. People could call in, report their listings, and keep up on the news of Ogopogo would be a great thing. And so we designed this website, ogopogoquest.com, in 2003. And it's been really an incredible website.
The Ogopogo Quest website was launched in 2004 and since then has served as an online database collecting reports as well as photo and video evidence of the lake creature. It also documents many of Bill's expeditions on the lake and the findings of those efforts. Yet, possibly the most profound experience for Bill was still to come.
One of the most incredible things in 2015, I live on the lake in Kelowna, BC, and my wife and I were sitting on our patio about 6:30 at night overlooking the lake, and lo and behold, our friend stuck his head out of the water, and I got an incredible picture. Actually, I got a number of them. And I find it rather ironic that all the years I spent in boats floating around the lake looking for Ogopogo, here he was, right off of my patio.
With a captain secured, the expedition to Rattlesnake Island was now in motion.
He captained the boat. He took you and I, Eli, as well as a colleague of mine named Olivier, and then Coralie Miller and her cousin Kate.
We'll approach it carefully. It's either we'll be able to go close or we won't. And that's the thing, is there has to be, again, that respect. When we head to Rattlesnake Island, that is the home of Nkakaiku and Nkakaulau. We're gonna drop some tobacco in the water and we're gonna see if it'll let us close. If the water starts to pick up and get choppy, then not today. But if the water stays calm, then yeah, we'll be able to get a closer look. It's important to introduce yourself and let yourself be known. And we do that whether we're on the water or if we're on the land. You drop a little offering and you introduce yourself. The land gets to know who you are, the land becomes accustomed to you, and then the land will do what it takes to protect you and make sure that you get the things that you need. So today it's going to be a coin toss. Either, yeah, we can go visit, or nope, turn around. All right, it's in a good mood. Let's keep it that way. Why Snoxkailo? Why Nchacha Itku? Why Chacha Ulau? I squeezed Corley. I squeezed Kate. I squeezed Eli. I squeezed Jason. I squeezed Bill. I squeezed Ollie. No. Red lipped. Thank you for letting us get nice and close to you.
Hang on a bit, guys.
So we have two spirits. We have Nchacha Itku, which is the water spirit, and then we have Chacha Ulau, which is the rattlesnake. And so those two live together on Rattlesnake Island. It's believed that that is where Nchacha Itku will most likely manifest itself. There are underwater caverns that it travels through to get from different lakes into different little ponds. And my great-grandmother, Mary Derrickson, she said that the rattlesnakes protect Nchacha Itku, and they're just the company that Nchacha Itku kind of prefers.
Nchacha ins, yeah.
Yeah, Nchacha Itku.
Nchacha ins. Ins. Nchacha ins?
Nchacha Itku.
Itku.
Yeah.
Nchacha Itku.
Yeah.
Hey.
Many of the First Nations believe that lakes of interior British Columbia are connected to each other through unseen waterways, and more recent discoveries seem to back this belief. Nearly every lake in the interior of British Columbia is home to a lake monster, many bearing a strong resemblance to that of Ogopogo. Due to the cost and difficulty of underwater exploration, it could be possible that the creature, known as Ogopogo, belongs to a species of aquatic animals that uses underwater passages to get from lake to lake.
Yeah, where we're sitting right now, we're sitting in, well, Rattlesnake Island, Squally Point area. This is an interesting area. The water drops off from shore down to 250 feet. And in those sheer walls, there are caves, many of which haven't been explored. But the ones that we looked at were really interesting. We found one cave at the 80-foot mark, and it's just very close to here where we are. And our divers, they actually found water pressure coming out of the cave itself. And of course, there's an indication right there that perhaps, according to the First Nations people, all the lakes in the interior of British Columbia are connected. And these passageways would be great for animals to travel back and forth. So it's quite a possibility.
I think almost every lake, sort of even in Canada at least, has a story connected to it.
Yeah.
A similar story.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. But this is an immense body of water. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, it's almost 90 miles long. 3.5 miles across. It's huge.
Yep. Very similar to Loch Ness, even in its shape, but it's bigger.
Yeah, it's about 4 times as big as Loch Ness.
But it's a similar kind of idea, long.
And that's an interesting comment, because Loch Ness is close to the same latitude. I think it's a little farther north.
They're 8 degrees apart or something.
Yeah,
like
it's a little farther north. It's got the same depth.
Yep.
It's around 200, 220, but it's only 23 miles long. It's not very big.
No, this is much longer.
Yeah.
There's apparently, amongst cryptozoologists, they call it like the lake monster belt.
Yeah.
Within the same latitude, longitude.
Yeah.
Most of these lakes that do have lake monster stories attached to them.
Yeah. No.
Very similar lakes created around the same time. Glacial lakes. So.
But I'm not a fan of this plesiosaur thing, and, you know, I mean, come on. They died out 65 million years ago. And by the way, a plesiosaur wasn't a dinosaur anyway. It was a reptile.
Yeah. And the descriptions of all these are similar too. More long, serpentine, sort of the head like, you know, a horse, dragony head, you know, tail like a whale a little bit.
You know, and these so-called, you know, plesiosaurs, apparently they were air-breathing.
You'd see them more often.
Yeah, they'd be coming up all the time to get some air. I mean, they can't hold their breath forever.
No.
You know.
These, if they are a creature, are much more elusive. So they would be, they'd almost be more amphibian.
Exactly.
Or a mammalian, like, you know, or whale-like. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to go to Rattlesnake Island with them, which is where Ogopogo is believed to reside, you know, under the island or Squally Point and the many caves beneath there. I just kind of hear their insights. I'm going to be that close to something that I've heard about my entire life, seen dozens of times, was a really cool experience. And just talk to Bill and hear their story and talk to Coralie. It was like one of the coolest things I think I've ever done in my life. So we were really lucky on this expedition to have not one boat trip, but two, and to have them really mean something and bear real fruit in our quest to find out what is Ogopogo and what does it mean.
In 1984, the local tourism agency offered a $1 million prize to anyone who could prove the existence of Ogopogo. This caught the attention of the non-profit environmental activism group Greenpeace, who named Ogopogo an endangered species and demanded that Ogopogo could only be caught on film. As incredible as it may seem, some feel that Greenpeace's actions were well-intentioned, albeit slightly misdirected, because more so than the creature, the lake itself should be protected.
The whole point of our organization is conservation and preservation. We look for allies in that area. And we've heard of Greenpeace's efforts way, way back when they were interested in the animal being protected from a conservation and protection point of view. But they haven't been active at that lake for 3-4 decades now in that regard. Anything that's been done has been done by ourselves and some local people who were really interested in getting it protected. And in 1989, we got an order in council passed by the legislature here protecting any animal in the lake that's more than 3 meters long. And you cannot catch this thing unless you use rod and line, so that completely eliminates it. Plus the BC Wildlife Act prevents you from hunting or killing this thing with projectiles and explosives. So Ogopogo is pretty much protected that way, but it's the environmental consequences that we're most worried about, and that's what Greenpeace felt. But, you know, Ogopogo slipped from their memory banks and they've done nothing for a long time. Anyway, the lake now has a few problems. Number one is human pollution. That's from sewage. It's much better than it used to be. The second one is a lot of oil slicks there from recreational motorboats out on the lake. And then, you know, there's garbage and other stuff that they find there, but it's not too bad. It could be a lot worse than it is. But environmentally speaking, at least the folks of the Okanagan Valley are very conscientious about protecting their lake. And they need to do that, not only for themselves, but for that thing or things that live in that lake.
We don't see as many manifestations of it now today because it's not happy. The water isn't clean, it's filthy. And there's lots of commotion on the lake as well. Too many boaters, too many fishermen, and our salmon numbers are quite low. They're not as plentiful as they used to be. And so if we took better care of the water, if we were more mindful when we're out on the lake, perhaps we would see more of it. But it's not something that needs to be feared. Now there are stories of how boats had been sucked underwater and horses had been taken, but that's because the way spirits work in our culture is what's given is what's returned. So when we go into the water with respect and with good thoughts, you're going to be okay. But if you go into the water and you're mocking and you're disrespectful or you're seeking to claim dominion over water, Anytime we try to claim dominion over nature, we are humbled. we get taught very quickly that we can't. But there has to be that respect to the water. There are underwater streams that suck people in, and they have. I think we underestimate the power of water too much, and that's where a lot of that devastation comes from. But that goes with anything in our culture too. We don't believe that there's inherently good or inherently evil. There's a lot of gray, and so water can be quite healing and helpful until it's not. You know, when the floods come and your house gets carried away or people drown. Same thing goes with a fire. Fire is cleansing and so healing for the land until it's not.
Okanagan Lake is a wonderful place for people to come and visit, enjoy great holidays up there, have a spectacular time. But I'm always encouraging anybody who wants to go out there and do Ogopogo research to respect the lake and respect what is in there. I think the First Nations are very good with that kind of attitude. They talk about respecting the spirit of the lake. I don't see it as a spirit, but that's fine. I see it as being a real animal. And because of its rarity, it's certainly endangered. There can't be that many of them, okay? If there is a breeding population, the genetic gene pool is going to wear down at some stage, and they'll be unable to reproduce and become sterile at some point. But suffice it to say, treat the lake and treat its inhabitant and the inhabitants around it with the utmost respect, and do not harm anything. I've known of people who shot at this thing or have wanted to shoot this thing, dynamite it, spear gun it. Sorry, please don't. This is an animal that is so rare that anything that we do to jeopardize it or harm it could mean that we would lose an entire species.
Going into sort of my research on Ogopogo, I didn't really think it could be real. It's a lake. It's basically landlocked. Sure, you can go through like, a little channel to Skaha Lake and eventually through the Columbia rivers down, to the ocean. But that's a heck of a trek for anything to make. But I had my doubts. But when you kind of come out here and you actually spend time on the lake and see how big it is, and then you hear like the stories of Coralie's people and how it's more than just a physical being. It's something spiritual. I mean, I'm a paranormal investigator. I look for spirits. It's what I do. I can kind of lean towards that as being, to me, very plausible. It makes sense that it's something that just shows itself to people once in a while. And then if you see it, you're really lucky to actually see it, because it's a rare thing for it to want to be seen. So I think, I never like explaining an unknown with an unknown, but to me, that makes sense. If you go by Occam's razor, it makes sense that it could be something more than just a monster.
Cryptid, monster, water spirit. If anything is clear about Ogopogo, it is that its perception has shifted with each appearance it has made. It remains elusive enough to evade the most ardent researchers, yet always seems to poke its head above the waves, just long enough to remind us that it's there. Ogopogo may never be caught or catalogued, but its presence is inseparable from the water. To enter the lake is to enter its domain, and to capture it, all one has to do is to take a cup and scoop it up.